Oh, these are comfy. Thanks for the great intro, Shelley. I'm feeling sexy. How about you guys? Tsvi, Jacob?
You're not getting a lot of agreement there, but okay.
I think that infrastructure is one of the most exciting things in the world.
Yeah.
And I also don't think that we should scare everybody to death with all the security issues that we are facing.
Oh, we'll get to security. I know we'd get thrown off the stage if we don't touch on security. But first, just to make some brief introductions of my distinguished panelists. To my right and your left is Jacob Lamm, who's the Executive Vice President of Strategy and Corp Dev at CA. Of course, CA is one of the giants of the infrastructure software business, New York Stock Exchange company, $14 billion market cap. Long history of building both organically through internal development, as well as been one of the more acquisitive companies in the software ecosystem. Well-known acquisitions such as Nimsoft, NetQoS, Wiley. And Jacob himself was an entrepreneur way back when because he got to CA through the acquisition of a company that he founded. So glad to have you. Thanks.
Great to be here. And yes, agree, infrastructure is sexy. So I don't know where Shelley got that from, that it's not. Who said it's not?
And of course, Tsvi from Morgan Stanley, the CTO. If you've been hanging out in the Wall Street technology circles, he's a man who needs no introduction. He's had similar roles at many other leading financial institutions, from Bridgewater, Deutsche Bank, and has even dabbled in some other verticals, at various points of his career at AT&T and Warner Music, which is the stories I want to hear about at the dinner. And so brings obviously a diverse perspective of technology leadership. So thanks, Tsvi.
Thank you.
So maybe just starting, with you, maybe you could give the audience a sense of, clearly Morgan Stanley has more software developers than investment bankers, but a sense of the scale of the IT plant at Morgan Stanley, and maybe how you interact with startups.
Sure. So in terms of scale, I mean, it may sound large, but relatively speaking, it's not that big. So let me suggest the following. As a bank overall, we have about 56,000 employees, another 40,000 consultants and other types. In IT, we have about 12,000 developers in IT. What else? In terms of planet size, since it's infrastructure, I will tell you, otherwise nobody would care. But to share this point, infrastructure is boring, so I'll bore you with some statistics. We have about 90,000 physical servers. We have about 400 and so petabytes of storage. And we have about 200,000 points of connections, PCs, desktops, laptops, and so on and so forth. We operate in 7 major centers of IT around the world, and in 48 countries, and that's about it.
And what's the best way, for a small company, startups moving fast, to kind of get engaged with Morgan Stanley, given your vast kind of scale?
So Morgan actually has a long tradition of working with startups and emerging companies. There are several ways we do it. We conduct what we call a tech week, which is we go once a year to Silicon Valley. We spend a week there, in which the first 3 days we meet with the CEOs of the largest companies, Meg Whitman, John Chambers, etc. The last 2 days, we work with our partners in the venture capital world, and they submit about 1,000 or more names of companies. We filter them through one of our organizations called TechBD. And we choose about 100, and those 100 we do speed dating. We go around and meet with each and every one of them. And there are 3 goals. The first one is for internal use, something that we could use in Morgan Stanley for the benefit of our technology group and what we do there. The second one is for our bankers to identify potential clients of the future, because the sooner you start the relationship, the more likely at the end you will choose us over the competition, especially the ones that we call fondly the banks that cannot be named, and or the bank of evil. But otherwise, seriously, they're all friends, so it's okay. So that's the second one, and the third one is that in rare occasions we actually will invest in those companies as well. I'll give just one example, and then we'll move on, and I'll explain how to talk to us otherwise. Splunk was a good example. About 3.5 years ago, we identified them as an interesting opportunity. We actually invested in them. We were the M&A partner, and so we had both, and we are today probably the largest client that they have worldwide. So we are the largest client. We took them public, and the relationship is fantastic. So that's an example. What we normally do, we identify the right companies either via this tool, which is again in California. We have one that we do in London. We're going to do one in Asia, or we do it through the relationships that we have through the Tech BD. And so normally what we do, if the opportunity is interesting, if the company is something of interest to us, we're going to bring it to our labs, we're going to test it, and if it works well, we're just going to enter a relationship.
Got it. And, you know, as a venture capitalist, obviously I like to talk to people who consume IT and who consume startups. So switching over to Jacob, you know, obviously CA has a long heritage both on the IT operations side of the house as well as the software development side. And in the past, these have been sort of disparate disciplines, if you will, but now coming together rapidly, driven by trends in private cloud and virtualization and such. How do you guys see this intersection?
Well, I mean, certainly you can't just do things organically. You've got to, you know, have a plan that looks 3 years out in the future, understand where you're best equipped based on your people, your knowledge, the market, and where you want to let the VCs take the risk. Right? Publicly traded companies are not designed, our investors don't want us to take the type of risk that a VC would. So we look at that market, and we see where we want to invest organically, and then we look at the population of startups. So same concept that Tsvi said, but we'll come at it as we'll look at that, you know, relationship with the VCs, but then we'll go to the banks and we'll say, you know, okay, who are you using, right? And you know, we have that, you know, multi-tiered relationship with Morgan Stanley's and the other banks, which should not be named, but you know, both banking relationships, but also customers and providers. And we'll often get recommendations, hey, you should look at this company. Or if we're talking to a VC and we're looking at a startup, we'll say, who are some of your customers? Have the banks bought your product? And you know, we have relationships with all of the CIOs and the infrastructure managers, and we'll call them up and say, are you using this product? How's it going? What do you think? And so clearly, you know, those are the kind of relationships we have. When we, you know, the interesting thing when you talk about startups and what we have, I mean, so the CAs of the world, we provide suites of solutions. So we're not a point solution. The value we had is we have suites. And so at various times in the market, Morgan Stanley will say, I'm open to taking a point solution because there's a problem that's not been solved yet. But those get commoditized very quickly. And at some point, an IT organization can say, well, you know, I want to manage that virtual server the same way I manage my non-virtual, cloud servers the same way in a single pane of glass, and suddenly I want to get that from one provider. So I think the timing the market for startups is important to kind of when you talk to the Morgan Stanley versus when you look for an exit. And that the time frames are getting, you used to have 5 years to figure that out. That's getting shorter and shorter. So the discussions you have, you know, with the acquirers and with your customers are becoming very interactive.
And so would you advise startups even at an earlier stage to begin to at least build a bridge to companies like CA, build that relationship?
Well, I think you clearly have to have a target in mind, right? Are you a component that's going to end up as part of a bigger suite of solutions? Is that your exit? Or are you a platform, right? Are you a platform on a new paradigm that's going to start adding new capabilities and introduce a new way of doing things? And you know, when startups don't have that, you know, vision in mind, especially it's thinking about an exit early can sometimes be dangerous. You want to allow pivoting. You want to allow room for innovation. But because of this timing dynamic, because things move so quickly, things get commoditized so quickly in this space, you need to constantly start thinking about that. Where am I now? Am I a component in somebody else's ecosystem? Will I be an orphaned component without the rest of the ecosystem? Or do I want to be part of someone else's ecosystem? And that's got to constantly be part of the pivoting dialogue that goes on in the company.
Yeah. And what are some of the, we mentioned, we were talking about, your strength in IT operations, and on the software development side, DevOps is a big buzzword. You guys are sort of well positioned there. How are you guys seeing that space evolve, driven by the transformation and the journey to the cloud?
So the underlying market dynamic there is the construction of composite applications. So what makes, DevOps is just about delivering software faster with higher quality, and moving that into production. But if you bookend it in a broader way, it's being driven because of component-driven architecture. So what makes infrastructure so sexy now is because it's moved to the value side of the equation. So historically, when you talk to CIOs about what's their strategic initiatives, they're often around applications, right? And infrastructure is almost yes, critically important, but it's plumbing, right? It has to be there. It's mission critical, but the value, when talking about strategy, where I drive my top line, it's the applications, right? That value commodity kind of equation is starting to swap in the market. What the cloud's done is it's taking software and it's almost kind of commoditizing it. Right? Oh, ERP systems, I can get them, I can get open source, I can get them in the cloud, I can get components. And so companies, banks are driving value by saying, I can pay my own little components, commoditize pieces that I can get in the marketplace and put them together in interesting, innovative ways, faster and better than my competitors can. And that's how I drive market value. Well, that's the stuff of infrastructure. It's making things in different platforms, from different vendors work together very quickly in secure ways, and that requires a new discipline, and DevOps is really just part of that new discipline. So it's about how I use infrastructure and the components that live on it in interesting and agile ways.
Yeah, it's interesting to see SOA reborn with a new moniker as microservices and agile.
Yep.
Are you seeing these trends inside which pieces of Morgan Stanley's, are moving more rapidly in these directions?
So first, let me assure you that we are totally buzzword compliant.
Outstanding.
So every buzzword you have, we are looking at. No, but I think that in terms of DevOps, or what we call developer enablement, it is really just a way for developers to work with infrastructure people closer. And some of the things that lead to this is what we call infrastructure as a code, or what you may know as SDX, or software-defined anything else.
Everything.
And while it sounds like buzzword, it actually does make a difference. It started with the emergence of virtualization, the VMs and so on. And with this came the fact that we can now abstract some of the services and then provide them to the applications in a way that it is just API driven. So with RESTful APIs or others, we can actually present this is how you manage the environment. And it becomes very important or very differentiating when we deal with the special cases. So I would say that in our general computing, DevOps is still not the norm because we don't need it. The developers do their development, we provide them with the infrastructure, and it works pretty well. One of the ways that we are able to control the cost of our infrastructure or the server environment is that we allow our application developers to choose any servers that they want as long as it's that configuration. So it's the Model T.
Yep.
You have one
as long
choice,
as it's black.
Here it is. If you like it, great. If you need more, buy 2 of them. So that's basically the goal. But in special cases, for example, in our algorithmic trading or low latency, the name of the game there is time. We need to process as soon as we can, and we are talking about milliseconds. We are now moving into microseconds. And the way to do it is by collaboration between the application developers that are trying to basically improve their software and be more effective,
yeah.
and the underlying infrastructures that could cut some corners in the way we approach the data, either in memory or in storage. Some of the things that we do are illegal in several states just because of what we are trying to do there. But this collaboration is essential because the improvement, sometimes when you turn the knob in the application, you will basically create damage on the infrastructure and vice versa. We can throw SSD at you and suddenly we're going to take you out of the equilibrium.
Yeah.
So this
time is money for you, for
this
sure.
is really the key where developers and operations folks or systems people really work together, sit together, work together, because we have to do it, and that's how we gain.
All right, so I think we're going to get booed off stage if we don't talk about security. Obviously, everybody understands changing dynamics in the threat landscape. You know, I imagine the budgets for the CISO and security teams are going up, but there's a sort of mixed shift, you know, people focused on network, endpoint, database, or just kind of give me one of everything and it's all you can eat at the buffet.
So, I mean, when you look at security, there are several things to keep in mind. The first one is, you're right. I mean, we moved from the era when our threat was individual hackers to the times that it was organized crime to now that we are talking about nation type of attacks. And we see it every day. It's true. So the name of the game there is to harden your environment in certain ways. The first one is, it was a common belief that once you protect the perimeter, you do perimeter protection, once you're inside the perimeter, you're okay to do whatever you want. This is no longer the case.
Yes, this is the Cadbury egg model of security.
Yeah, so to Shelley's point that everybody was hacked, etc., we have several funny anecdotes to say about it, but in reality, it's a real threat. So we deal with basically the three components, which is the prevention, the detection, and the recovery. And the key is that assuming that you're in, how do we now protect within? So we assume that each and every host is a suspect. Even if you are in the perimeter, we still suspect you, and we are looking for anomalies in your behavior. That's the way for us to protect. So to answer your question, it's not really a matter of whether we protect the databases, the mobile phone, the network. We need to defend the entire environment with the assumption that inside the house we already have a predator. Yeah. And that's really the biggest change, because until now we assumed that once you're outside of firewall, okay, inside you're
everything
good.
Goes. Yeah.
It's no longer the case.
How are you guys seeing this, Jacob? CA has some set of security products for access control and things, but are there different spaces that you guys are interested in evaluating and working with startups?
So traditionally, we've got close to $500 million business in the identity management space in general, but there's, I guess, two fundamentals in the security space. I think it's consistent with what Tsvi's saying. Number one, from a business perspective, instant gratification versus sound security parameters. Instant gratification almost always wins out. So the business side, saying no is not an option anymore, right? So the business side is going to drive it, and you're going to need to, make concessions, whether it's use of various mobile devices, configurations. You say you have one option right now. In 6 months that's going to change. There'll be another option. I don't know. No. Okay. So from a business, then you just don't know about it maybe, but it's happening. So
we actually do. We do know and
know. So how do you say yes, I think, is the answer, and not say no, but how do you say yes in more flexible ways? And I don't think there's a security application that's out there now that isn't largely driven by some form of analytics.
Yeah.
And so, analytics is the name of the game in security, looking at behavior. So whereas before it was hardening, looking at identities and hardening perimeters, now it's really about understanding who the characters are, what their behaviors are. And from an Israeli startup perspective, that seems to be a real sweet spot in the number of companies we're seeing that using that in interesting ways and doing some interesting things around security using analytics.
Yeah, indeed it is. And so the security teams are transforming into not just the guys who say no, but who are helping to enable the line of business.
That's the key, and that's the key to being successful in security now. It's enabling business, not being paralyzed by, whether it's, banking standards or government standards or the fear of getting hacked.
Well, let me explain why did I disagree with you and when I do agree. So in our environment, it's not a democracy, okay? So you cannot go and get your own device and now you're connected to the network. Go get whatever your device you want. You're not going to be connected to the network. We do allow people to use, mobile devices. We have BYOD and other stuff. So it's not that we don't, but we actually do not allow this type of things. For example, in our shop, you cannot use a USB. You can try, it's just not going to work. And by the way, the moment you put it there, within about the time it takes the security guard to get to your desk, that's the time you have to still work in Morgan Stanley.
Yeah. Well, I think that security guard might be about to throw us off the stage. I'm sorry, Tsvi, but I know we're going to be covering security in a lot more detail in the next panel. So I want to thank you guys for doing this with us. Let's give Tsvi and Jacob a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.